welcome to the Hardcore Soft Skills Podcast. This is Gabby Caro. In each episode, we'll learn about a different soft skill and lessons on how to apply them. Soft skills are the non-technical skills that actually make hard skills work. So if you are in a highly technical field who wants to get that project going, if you are getting ready for a career move, or if you are simply a lifelong learner, this podcast is for you. Thank you for joining me in this learning venture. Today, we talk about adaptability. Adaptability is the ability to quickly learn and respond to changing circumstances. And as you know, since we started the year 2020, this skill was put to the test for all of us as we confronted the pandemic effects in our work and our homes. Our ability to manage change is considered today one of the key soft skills employers look in candidates. A survey conducted by the IT certification company CompTIA among international organizations revealed the top skill companies were looking for in a candidate was adaptability. By the way, the survey was conducted before the pandemic started, so imagine the value it has now. We also have to adapt to new technologies, new processes, and new teammates. Having the right approach to learning and being open to change is essential. My guest today knows about dealing with changes in the modern workplace culture and how to revolutionize learning effectively. Crystal Kadakia is a speaker and an author of The Millennial Myth and Designing for Modern Learning. Through her company, Kadakia Consulting, she has helped many organizations about driving change and adapting to a new digital age. In her work, she approaches how new generations, specifically millennials, have a lot to teach others about adapting to change as well. In this episode, Crystal and I talked about tips to adapt to current changes, especially how to handle our ability to work remotely and ways to approach learning. Let's listen. For the topic of adaptability, I certainly thought of you. I've just finished reading your book, The Millennial Myth, and it was great, educational. I hope like a bunch of non-millennials read it. I'm a millennial myself, and I did want to talk to you because you seem very knowledgeable about the adapting to modern workplace environment and how can we better work together in different generations. So I truly appreciate your time.
Yeah, absolutely. What a great podcast to start. I love the focus on soft skills because there's so many, and it's nice to be able to kind of break them apart and, take a look at each one. So very cool.
I want to start with in terms of your own career, just to get to know you a little bit more, because you are an author and also you're an organizational consultant, but did you start your career as an engineer?
Yeah, so I've had a pretty interesting career path. Some would say it's very millennial of me, but I started out actually as a chemical engineer. I got my bachelor's in chemical engineering, started out working for a big Fortune 500 company, Procter & Gamble, as a project engineer, and worked in that role for about 4 years before realizing that really, I love P&G a lot, but what you do from a day-to-day standpoint is very different than like what you learn in college around chemical engineering. And for me, there was I think a lot of times this happens to people where, as they grow older, they kind of learn more about themselves and what I've always had a tendency to really want my internal and my external self to align. And I realized my internal and my external self was not aligning when I was functioning as an engineer out there in the world. There's just different ways I wanted to contribute. And so what I often tell people is that, I learned a lot about problem solving in my engineering world. And that's something I would never trade because I found that I love solving problems, just not necessarily engineering kinds of problems out in the world. I really love solving people problems. So I actually took a role in training, which was the first opportunity I had to work in the people space. And eventually that led to me wanting to go even further and beyond training and learning and development to really organization development. So for those of you who might not know what OD is all about, it's about change, and it's about how you actually build the capacity for change in communities, in systems, in organizations. And so it requires a lot of messiness, right? Of understanding what's going on socially for each of us as people, and how do we collectively come together and grow our own capacity for change. And so I think your topic of adaptability is a really great one, because of course that would be at the center of building that capability.
And how did you, I guess it came natural to you, but how did you adapt yourself to that transition from a chemical engineer into this more full type role of working as a trainer and then transitioning throughout your career?
Yeah, so something I really have always felt is that we all have strengths inside of us that, from our history of growing up, however you grew up, there's something that comes innate to you, that comes intuitive to you. And you could focus on all of the things that you're not good at, or you could focus on that which comes to you naturally and apply that in a way that makes you proud of yourself, really. So for me, adapting, the easy part of it is that I feel a lot of my attention goes towards my strengths and wanting to really leverage those. And that part is easy. I think the parts that were the hardest were really my mindset and all of also the ideas you might learn about success growing up, right? That has nothing to do with your strengths or weaknesses, but you have been taught different ways of interpreting what success looks like. We all have different ideas about money and stability, and especially as I started my own business, after the training role, I really started my own consulting practice, which now I've been doing for 9 years. That leap, it required a lot of struggle and thinking around topics like risk, financial stability, what's most important to me, the perceived stability of a paycheck or the flexibility of lifestyle. And so, I think when you adapt to something, there's the innate strengths you have, which can help you. And then there's the perspectives that might be holding you back. And so for me, the struggle and the challenge I feel for most people is to learn new perspectives from different people. People who are so outside of your norm, your community, because, hey, you've already heard all those messages, and that's why you have the perspective that you have right now of what's possible. The only way for you to break out of that rut of perspective is to learn from people very different from you. So for me, in the entrepreneurial space, frankly, as a millennial female, a lot of the successful entrepreneurs I saw were white males, in the US. And even in my generation, a lot of entrepreneurs I run across tend to be male. So, instead of kind of taking the approach of, let me just band together with other people like me, which I also do. And in order for me to break through perspectives that might be holding me back, I really went to who's already successful in this. And let me see, how are they approaching these problems? How are they thinking of it? And that certainly helped me become more adaptable.
Well, that's great, because I like the fact that you talk a lot about appreciating the perspective from others that are not like ourselves. And I just read your book, The Millennial Myth, and I was curious to ask you as well in terms of, because you talk a lot in the book about the kind of embracing our differences and making sure that we all learn from each other. What made you write that book? Were there a lot of differences from you as a millennial coming into the workforce, and any struggles that you were having? What was the motivation of the book?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I started my consulting practice 9 years ago. And initially when I started, the problem I was aiming to solve, or the thought leadership platform I was building, was around generations. When I was working at Procter & Gamble, I saw a lot of gap between how leaders were interpreting the new generation, and especially thought leaders. So a lot of times the people who were writing the books at that time about millennials, they were boomers. So just inherently, even if you try to do a good job of it, which many did, you come with an unconscious bias, around generations. And there wasn't really millennials speaking about the problem, and millennials who had the experience in organizational life. So in fact, what I saw in the workplace was not really lining up with what I was reading about in books, or what was being experienced as generational training in the workplace. It was completely different. In fact, I'd have people of all generations tell me, like, I don't really think these stereotypes make a lot of sense. And so that was the problem that I immediately started solving. It was the thing I had the most experience in at that time. So I used that as my entryway to then later talk about future of work, which is really my focus now. And I would actually call it digital workplace culture, but that term hasn't really taken off yet. So it's about the future of work, but today. So what led me to write the book is, after 4 years of speaking about generations, I actually had the opportunity where a mentor of mine said, you really should write a book about this, and I'm willing to introduce you to some people. What do you think? Will you put together a proposal? And I was like, wow, you really think I'm ready? And this is where, again, like talking to people from different circles, we all would like to believe that there's some method to the madness, but at the end of the day, the world moves through people. So, the opportunity came, I went for it. Had the support of this mentor who's fantastic, and I'll always thank her for that. And the book really became a culmination of everything that I'd been speaking about for 4 years and all the experiences I had at that point doing generation training.
What are some of the things that people have struggled with the most in terms of adapting to the future of work? First of all, when you talk about the future of work, are you talking specifically about digital and moving more towards different kind of online type of work, or what does it mean to you?
Yeah, so I really think of it as digital workplace culture. So, there's the new technologies we could all bring into our workplace, and that's fine, but to me, digital technology is a tool. And the fact is that digital technology is changing every part of human behavior and the way in which we get work done. So when I talk about digital workplace culture and future of work today, what I'm really talking about is, how are we as a world, as a society, evolving our pre-digital workplaces, which, by the way, those were set way back in the industrial age. So there's been a certain structure that's been around, a way of working that's been around for 50 plus years. How are we evolving that for all of this new behavior and expectations and context that we have available today? It's not really about catering to future generations or anything like that. It's just a fundamental fact that things have changed. A lot of our old assumptions about how we get work done, and even what kind of work we're trying to produce, are outdated. And so when you ask your other question about what are people struggling the most with in adapting to this future of work, so I look at it, I'm oversimplifying it a bit, but on one hand, you have the status quo leaders and tenured individuals, and in their case, a big struggle of adaptation is around letting go of those outdated assumptions and seeing that those assumptions really aren't necessarily true anymore. Another big struggle I see with older generations or tenured folks is wanting people to go through the experience they did, which just frankly, isn't valid. It doesn't really make sense, because we have a whole new set of challenges to go through today, and there's no real rhyme or reason for everyone going through the exact same experience just because, because ego, right? Like, I don't know I've talked to many people who feel this way, and it, to be very frank, it comes down to a sense of bitterness or unfairness or injustice. And, is that really the kind of leader or manager you want to be? And I often ask folks to really take a hard look at themselves and say, is that who you would like to be if you are stuck in that realm of resistance towards adaptation? On the other hand, you have, younger folks, and in the younger folks, the adaptation, it's really a struggle to bring in purpose and intentionality into what you're doing, because the experience we're having today, and the challenge is that the choices are infinite. So technology offers us so much choice, and it offers us so many options, that we didn't have to decide between before. And so there's many people who are still just kind of letting technology choose for them, right? This is like the person who just keeps getting all the spam emails and they don't block from it, or they leave their cell phone on them all the time and they don't know how to disconnect, right? They're letting technology make their choice for them. And that stops you from adapting in an effective way. And so for young people, I think the biggest thing is to really keep asking yourself why. Why are you doing what you're doing? And by the way, this goes for actually all generations, not really younger folks, but I have seen older folks more easily, because they have another context, be able to turn things off. But they still, everyone needs this question of why to guide them before taking action in this digital world, because technology is deciding a lot for us without thinking about that why.
Yeah, I really like that advice of not letting technology kind of drive you or make the choices for you. Because even though, yes, we are all driven by technology right now in terms of the way we operate in this world, but just making sure that we still have prioritized on what's important. That's really good too.
Yeah, I struggle with that myself, right? So the ease of Netflix, for example, as a choice. Netflix is my you could say my addiction, or my Achilles heel. It's my Achilles heel, right? Netflix for me is always that thing where I always wanted to know how the story ends when I was a kid, you know, and so I was an avid book reader. Well, now when you translate that to Netflix, it's infinite. The stories never end, right?
Yes.
And for me, it's always a conscious choice. Do I get sucked into this story, or what do I really need to be doing right now? Do I need to be going outside? Do I need to be connecting with a real person? You know, do I need to be caring about other people, right? These are all you never would think to have asked these questions before, you know, this digital technology, or it wouldn't have been as much of a need to ask those questions.
Yeah, certainly. I wanted to ask you as well, and another aspect of adaptability that I consider is the part of learning. And you just have recently launched a book for designing for modern learning, co-authored with Lisa Owens. And you talk about the concept of that modern learning. Can you explain a little bit about that concept?
Yeah, so this is a very niche book for the training industry. So people who are designing training in the workplace. So you can think back to my training manager role as the root of me and really still having a passion for how people learn at work. And, you know, this concept of modern learning, what it's about is that in our private lives outside of work, we are already used to having such a variety of options to learn. Ways, times, and places, and we make those choices on our own, no problem. But when we go to work, we still have kind of a very traditional learning and development approach that's based around classroom or e-learning or videos, very kind of structured curricula with a clear kind of start and stop. And maybe you engage with that once a quarter or once a year, whenever your workplace tells you to. And the rest of the time, you're left up to your own devices. So Designing for Modern Learning is a book that actually proposes a new model to design learning for people in the L&D field to help shift from our traditional approach of delivering kind of those one and done types of curriculas to actually consistently delivering a variety of ways, times, and places people can learn. So we're really just trying to help the L&D industry adapt to this digital age, because in the workplace, our learners don't have the time to be sifting through all of these different learning options on their own. It really helps to have someone who's doing their job and presenting the quality learning experience for people. You know, not to say L&D doesn't do their job, they've got a lot on their plate, but there's a little bit of a shift there, a pretty big shift as we think about learning in the digital age.
Anything that you would suggest to people working from home, or just that perhaps for some it may be preferable to just kind of work from anywhere for some of us, but for people that are not necessarily used to that, or what advice would you give to those people that are kind of like trying to completely had to adapt, not by choice, to this particular mode of work?
Yeah, so we talked a bit about leveraging your strengths that you already have, right? Don't lose sight of those. Think about how those might apply in this new context. We also talked a little bit about perspective shifts, and talking to other people who see a different possibility than you. So a lot of times it's easy to get depressed in a completely new situation, and you might be thinking, oh man, well, there's nothing I can do about this, and this all just sucks. And really, that's not how everyone thinks. So go seek out those people so you can see what's possible that you're not seeing, right? And the third thing I would say is, speaking a little bit earlier about letting go and examining assumptions, the people I see struggling the most, they're people who have tried to copy and paste their old life into this new life. So in their old work life, maybe everything was really clearly segmented and very rigid. Their schedule was really clear for them. And when they start working from home, they try to do that exact same thing, except now you have all these home influences around you. And, whether you have a family or you're on your own or whatever, maybe you don't know when to stop working. Maybe your work is constantly interrupted, whatever the case may be. And the truth is, your life is not as segmented at home as it is in the workplace. So you need to examine the basic assumption you're making and realize that you have a new set of rules in this. You're playing a new game here with yourself, right? And with your own energy. So what are the rules of this new game? Again, spend time thinking about why, what's going on here, what's true, what's not in this new environment for me. And then design, be strategic, right? Like use your own intelligence and your own wisdom about yourself. Trust yourself to define what you need in this environment.
This is great advice and a very great way to look at it and trying to achieve that different perspective. So I truly appreciate your advice and the time that you have given us today. How can people get in touch with you, or what's the best way to get in touch or know a little bit more about what's new on your world?
So I'm very accessible via LinkedIn. I respond to everyone who connects with me there. A couple of things I'll also point out if you're looking for some resources, if you're interested in the generational or future work types of shifts. Yadi, you mentioned the Millennial Myth, the book. Definitely recommend checking that out. We actually now also have an online course for people who are managing millennials specifically to help break down those myths. So if you're interested in either of those things, feel free to just let me know if you reach out to me on LinkedIn. Of course, Designing for Modern Learning is also available on Amazon. If you're an L&D person listening to this and you want to reach out, feel free. And other than that, just keep an eye out for what I'm doing. In the next year, my focus is really around digital technology and digital behavior and really helping people around this intention setting, this choice making as individuals. And so I'm really studying things like burnout, remote work, social connection, attention and focus and distraction, information overload, some of these common huge challenges we have in our experience of the digital age, and really helping individuals learn how to navigate these tensions. Like I'm always connected and I'm always connected. So how do I, navigate that? That's a good thing and it's a terrifying thing. So if you're interested in staying in touch with work like that, you'll notice I publish blogs and things like that. So just let me know where your passions lie when you reach out to connect, and I'm happy to be connected with anyone who listens to this podcast.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Hardcore Soft Skills Podcast. If you have learned something today, share this episode with others. To find out about new episodes and skills to learn from, subscribe via your favorite podcast platform, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher. For more resources, visit our website, hardcoresoftskillspodcast.com. Thank you for listening.